What's up, my healthy friends? Good to have you here tuning in to the How to Not Get Sick and Die podcast. We've been at it for about 5 years, would you believe? And this year, in 2024, it's my mission to coach 500 people to get control of their sugar cravings and sugar binges so they can stop yo-yo dieting, stop obsessing about food, and finally create a body that they feel confident being in. Links for all that stuff are in the show notes below. So if you feel called to do work on your emotional binge or overeating patterns or anything like that, jump into the link in the show notes below and inquire about the bits and pieces that we've got that can help. Okay, today we've got a mate of mine who has been on the show before on episode 249, Dr. Richard Chambers, whom is, well, he is many things. He's a TEDx speaker, a clinical psychologist, formerly an associate professor at Monash University. He's a psychedelic expert, a mindfulness expert, has published a soiree of journal articles, and overall, he's just a good bloke to have on a podcast. Richard, how you doing, man?
Hey, Matty, I love that intro, mate, that you've drawn out all the best bits, all my most passionate things. You've just named them all one by one. So I'm doing great. It's an honor to be back on your podcast. You do such great work, man. I love listening to your potty. You have the best guests on here, and you really have great information going out that must be changing lives. It's got to be. So it's fantastic to be back here.
Oh, thanks, man. I appreciate all those kind words. Yeah, it's doing something. You know, a large number of people continue to listen, so we're doing something right.
Beautiful.
So we were just chatting before about all the possible directions that this conversation could go, and I really liked the talking point of just how our working with our unhealed trauma, because we've all got it, and you know it affects our lives in all sorts of ways, whether it be in our finances, in our relationships, in our raising children, all of the ways. So where do we start with that conversation? Because we've all got it. Everyone's got unhealed trauma, right?
Yeah, we do. And the best place to start is by acknowledging that every single one of us on some level have some kind of unhealed emotional wounds. You can call them trauma, attachment wounds. They're all different names of talking about it. And right away, just so your listeners understand, I think a really good distinction is between the capital T trauma of accidents, assault, deaths, all of those one-off incidents that just have such a big impact on people's lives, and the small t trauma. And that's where I spend a lot of my time working with myself, with my clients, anyone I'm coaching. I even weave it into my workshops now because it's such an important piece for anybody wanting to show up as their best self and lead from a more integrated place and be much more effective at what they do, but in a sustainable way. And the small t trauma, Matty, it really boils down to attachment trauma, because all of us grow up in families where at times our needs aren't met. At times we're overwhelmed with emotion, as little kids, overwhelmed with emotion, don't know how to be with that. And what we need in those moments is a strong attachment figure like mom or dad or grandma or someone to come and hold us in that intense experience and help us to co-regulate it. But nobody gets that consistently. And some of us don't really get much of that at all. Certainly in my life, I didn't really get much of that holding and support. And so as a result, we can't be with all these emotions and these experiences. So we kind of split off from them, or you could say we push them into the shadows, and they live on in the body, actually. It's quite fascinating the way that works. So we can differentiate capital T, which some of your listeners will be able to relate to, and small t trauma, which I think everybody, if they're really honest, can probably relate to that on some level.
Yeah, I think it's a good distinction between big T and little t because, and arguably, some people can be triggered by even people talking about little t as trauma. And I feel like in some ways, and I'm just going to use the word as the word, not its meaning, but in some ways I feel like the same about the word narcissist, which is that social media influencers have kind of hijacked that word. And now you've got everybody that have ever been in the dating game calling 90% of the people they've dated narcissists, right? Yeah. And so it's when actually it's like all humans have some narcissistic tendencies, and there's a very small percent of people that have narcissistic personality disorder. And so I feel like in some ways, trauma falls under that banner of it's kind of been social media abused. Like the word is just kind of thrown around for everything. Yeah.
It's so true. One of the things we learn in clinical psychology school, which is really interesting, when we're diagnosing, when you crack out the DSM, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, or the ICD-10, or some other sort of diagnostic Bible, it's basically a checklist. Depression for 2 or more weeks. Have you had, 5 or more of these list of symptoms? And you check them off. And then when you reach a threshold, you're like, okay, this could be depression, but there's always one question that makes it a diagnosis or not, which is, does this have a significant negative impact overall in your life? Is it messing up your life? And so look, we all carry trauma, right? We all have at least some small t, and some of us the big T trauma, and a combination sometimes. But how is that impacting your life? Right. And it's interesting you mentioned narcissism, because there's a strong relationship between narcissism and trauma, right? Because when we're little kids, for any of your listeners that have a kid in their life who's like 2 years old or can remember what it was like being a toddler, we are narcissistic. It's just the developmental phase that we're at, and it's totally normal. And kids make everything about them, for better or worse. So things are going well, they feel elated, they want everything now, that's mine, give it to me, they don't want to share, that kind of terrible twos as the ego starts to develop. But flip that coin over, and because we're making everything mean something about us, that's actually where small t trauma comes from. So let's imagine a scenario like parents unhappily married, conflict in the home, disconnection. Dad's always at work trying to avoid it. Mum's kind of getting frustrated and at him when he comes home from work. And there's just all this tension. If you're a 2-year-old or 3-year-old or 5-year-old kid, even a 10-year-old kid, you're making that mean something about you. Like you're looking around and you're sensing, there's something wrong in this environment. And because I'm the center of the universe, I must be the cause of what this is. And so if I can figure out what I'm doing wrong that's making mum and dad mad all the time, I can get some kind of control over that. So I need to start monitoring my behaviors and being hypervigilant and looking within. And we start to form these stories or beliefs that we are a problem. We're defective, we're unlovable, we're inadequate. There's something that we're doing that's causing these problems, because we don't have the abstract thinking, the empathy skills, the maturity to understand, mum and dad are really unhappily married. They need some counseling. We make it mean something about us. And that's where these attachment wounds start to come from. It begins at birth, whether we've got a solid attachment figure who is reliably there and we can kind of go off and explore and come back and always feel welcome and safe and co-regulate, and then slowly move further and further away, but always knowing it comes back. But these situations in life where kids at school are mean to us, parents are fighting, something happens, it can be neglect, it can be just, not getting our needs met. We think, there's something wrong with me. And on some level, we all carry these wounds, and they drive a lot of our behaviors unconsciously. Either we believe those stories, there's something wrong with me, I'm unlovable, I'm defective, I'm inadequate. And believing that, of course, is a nice core ingredient in the depression mix. Or what I see, because I do a lot of high performance and leadership coaching, and what I see instead is the reaction patterns, the coping strategies towards those core beliefs, where so many people who I work with are trying to prove that they're lovable, that there's nothing wrong with them, that they're enough. And they're driven and they're highly successful and they're type A, and they get a lot of external validation and they get a lot of success, and they get their careers progress, and they get a great lifestyle, lots of money and that kind of stuff. And it outwardly looks great, but they often come to see me either with this sense that there's something, I don't know, I just feel unsettled inside, or sometimes I get a bit depressed, or increasingly, I've had a heart attack, I've got health problems, or I've got relationship problems. Health problems, relationship problems, generally to me are the canary in the coal mine, that people are overcompensating, overdoing it, chasing that external validation, extrinsically motivated. And when you dig down underneath all of that is this unresolved emotional sort of attachment wounding. Only 10 times out of 10, but it's there. And that's where I go with people. For the people that do coaching with me who are brave enough to do it, and not everyone's up for the journey, but once they trust me and once they can see what's going on, we work with the coping strategies, the communication skills, the performance skills, the leadership tools, all that kind of stuff. But the ones that really get it and make progress are the ones that start to realize, underneath, I am believing on some level that I'm not enough or I'm defective. and I'm trying to prove to the world, to dad, to mum, to the world that I'm enough. And that's burning me out and it's making me unhappy, and I'm neglecting my body and my health, and I'm neglecting my relationships, and it's not sustainable. And so sustainable peak performance for me becomes all about resolving these core wounds until they're just not a problem anymore. And then you get choice and agency over how hard do I work? How long do I stay at work? Do I go hang out with my kids? Do I, take care of someone else's needs? Do I take care of my needs? That's where it can get to when it resolves.
I have so many questions. So, one thing that I battle with myself, and I've had conversations with my own psychologist about this, and I may have talked about it on the podcast before, but is I feel that there's a conundrum that, and maybe you can totally myth bust this, but I feel like there's a conundrum that is entered into when we have high performers, and you've got the example of the people at the other end of the spectrum, lots of money, lots of success, big companies, maybe extreme athletes, and then you start healing some of those wounds, and maybe the desire to be so successful and the desire to be better than everybody else and all of that starts to diminish. And so I wrestle with this own thing within myself, and I've been referred to as an overachiever my whole life, although I don't have a Lamborghini in the driveway, but we'll get there. But my question is that
we'll get to the Lamborghini, or we'll get to why that's not actually important for you. What are we going to get to?
We're going to get to both.
Okay.
But my question is, if you heal the person, or the person does all of the work, these high performers or people that are going to be high performers, how do you then have the motivation and internal drive to be a high performer if the fuel that you have used has now been removed, or the fire has been put out?
Yeah.
Because I've noticed the more work that I've done in life, the less, I'm not really on social media anymore. Everything I do is about business strategy rather than sharing my personal story, and sharing my personal life. It's moved in the direction of more, I'm here to serve. I've got a program that you'll benefit from. If you want it, you want it. If you don't, you don't. Whereas before it would have been like, oh my God, everybody that hasn't purchased it doesn't love me,
Yep.
And so that fire to just be an absolute savage, in my work ethic goes out the more healing that I do.
Yep. Look, that's a fantastic question and a really common objection or fear that comes up. It came up in me when I started doing this inner work, and it comes up all the time in my coaching clients. And it makes sense, doesn't it? Because for people who have been extrinsically motivated their whole life, to step out of that, it's like, I'm going to lose my edge. Where's my motivation going to come from? All the questions that you've just named that I'm sure are resonating with your listeners. So there's a couple of ways of coming at this. First of all is to see that when we're extrinsically motivated, right? So when we have extrinsic values motivating what we do, what we're doing is we're chasing reward and we're trying to avoid punishment. And there's nothing wrong with getting rewards. And of course, we don't want to get in trouble. So it makes sense. There's nothing wrong with extrinsic values, but they're incomplete. When we achieve them, we get a big hit of dopamine and other chemicals released in the brain and the body, and it feels good. But minutes or hours or days later, that subsides, and then we've got to get back on that treadmill and chase another goal and more success and more external validation and a pay raise and a promotion and all those kinds of things. And we go up and down on this dopamine roller coaster. And that's how a lot of people are living their lives. It's not wrong, it's just incomplete. When we start to connect more deeply with ourselves, we connect with our deeper values, and we can start to connect with our intrinsic values, the things that just give us a sense of meaning and purpose and light us up, even if in that particular moment we're not experiencing some big win or some powerful experience like being on a holiday or spending money in a restaurant or driving the Lambo out of the driveway, right? We're not. And so when we marry up the extrinsic and the intrinsic, the research is really clear. Chris Nemec's research, Ed Ryan, Ryan and Desi's research is really clear that being intrinsically motivated is much more stable. People who are intrinsically motivated, they tend to keep doing good things in the world. But rather than going up and down on this dopamine roller coaster, it comes from somewhere much deeper. And so even if things externally aren't actually going that well in any given moment, deep down, we trust that we're enough and everything's okay. Even if we have to lean into some discomfort, like let's take a It's like a medical student who wants to be a doctor. If they're extrinsically motivated, they want to get really good grades, to get a really good job, to make lots of money. And believe me, as soon as they start becoming a doctor in the medical system, they've got to get through the ranks to senior consultant level so they don't get bullied and they can start bullying everybody else, or at least not cop shit from the other consultants, right? So that's extrinsic motivation. Intrinsic motivation would be like, I really want to help people. I want to help people with their health. I want to learn as much as I can about the science of what makes for health and illness so I can ease that suffering and pain in people. I want to have a person-facing job because I like working with people, these deeper kinds of intrinsic motivation. And when we tap into that, we actually become highly, highly motivated. And it's much more resilient in any given moment than just being extrinsically motivated. So that'll be the first piece that I would say to that. And then the other thing is, it's like to answer your question in a different way, what in us is doing whatever we're doing, right? What in us is leading? What in us is working? And this is a question I have with a lot of people I work with now. I'm very interested in parts work, the inner world of different parts, or what psychologists call subpersonalities. This began with the Gestalt movement, a recognition, hey, we have different parts and we can put them in different chairs and work with them as literally parts of ourselves, and we are the sum of our parts, and in fact, we're greater than the sum of our parts. My favourite therapy and personal development model these days is called Internal Family Systems, or IFS, developed by Rick Schwartz. And it does the best job I've seen of naming the different parts that we have and the way that inner world kind of interacts and relates to itself. And again, if we're caught in a part, like a lot of us have what IFS calls exiles. So there are parts of us that feel some unresolved emotion and we don't know what to do about that. We push it away into the shadows. We ignore it. We neglect it. We judge it. We hide it, put a layer of shame over the top of it. And instead we form what are called managers and firefighters. Managers will do socially responsible things, trying to manage the unresolved pain of these exile inner child parts that have got those attachment wounds. So common manager parts would be the perfectionist, the overachiever, the people pleaser, the problem solver, the fixer, maybe the workaholic. There's all these parts, and people get caught in them. And this is a lot of what I do now. I help people see, you know what, all these health problems you're having, it's because you're caught up, you're run by a manager part or some combination of parts. You can't stop. You've got to keep achieving. These parts don't even care about health and well-being because all these different parts have different values, different agendas. People might come to me and say, I really value relationships and health. And I'm like, fantastic. They're awesome things to value. How much time and attention do you give them in your life? And then they're like, bugger all, to be honest. And I'm like, great. Well, let's not judge that, but let's have a look at what's running you. And then like, oh, my perfectionist overachiever is running me. And it's like, all right, so do you want these parts to run you, even though they are kicking goals and grinding it out and having these massive wins sometimes? Do you want to be run by parts of yourself, first of all, or do you want to be a whole integrated human? That's the first question to ask. Even that question sometimes helps people see, I don't want to be run by some small contracted part of myself. But if we look at the net result, all parts want good things, so we don't judge the parts. We might say, what does your overachiever really want for you that's good? What does your perfectionist want for you that's good? It wants to avoid mistakes, do a good job, get acceptance, feel part of something, feel loved, etc. Great. So positive intent. What are the costs of being run by those parts? Burnout, disconnection from myself, from people around me, from the world. I'm making bad decisions that are impacting the planet in negative ways. My health's going out the window. I'm unhappy. I'm feeling depressed. Meanwhile, my exiles deep down are calling out for love, and I don't know what to do with them. So then my firefighters come in because it's all too much, and I hose that down with screen addiction, food addiction, exercise addiction, just distraction, dissociation. These are all firefights. So now we've got the exiles deep down sending their managers to just deal, to do good in the world and build amazing lives and feel good about ourselves. But then the firefighters come in and hose all of that down when it gets too much, and we go round and round and round. And when people can see that, I've never met a person that's seen that clearly without judgment and decided that that's how they want to roll in the world. And if judgment comes up, it's like, that's another part. Here's the judge. Here's the self-critic. Do you want to be run by that now, or do you want to just give that a place in your kind of inner team And this is the work that I love doing with people, both in my workshops. I just took a group of people at a major retailer through a 4-hour session showing them this. And they were like, I mean, some of them are like, walls up, can't let this in yet. Some of them were like, holy shit, this is profound, seeing myself in this way. One came up at the end and was like, do you do one-on-one coaching? I want to go deep into this stuff. And when I do that one-on-one coaching, we map out the inner team. We look at how it's all playing out. Every part has a place. There's no bad parts, as Rick Schwartz talks about. His book, No Bad Parts, by the way, Rick Schwartz's book is a really good primer for this. And there's no bad parts, but they often get us not what we really want. And often they're getting us the opposite of what we want. And once we see that, we can realize that there's something here that's not our parts. If you can see a part, you're the awareness of that part. If you can start having a relationship with this inner world I'm describing, you are something that's not all of those contracted parts of your personality with their different agendas and beliefs and values and stories and behaviors. And that is the most powerful thing that I've ever discovered in my own life, and that I help other people to discover, is that if you can get these parts to just step back a little bit, because they're always taking over. They think they're the only person in the room who can get this done. This manager of mine, if I let that go, everything's going to fucking fall apart because I'm just, I'm so, and it's like, it's a belief. And then when they just experiment, what if just for a sec that part took half a step back, just half a step, and it can stay here and it can jump back in any time it needs. But I'm curious who is here when that part's not running you. And they start to tap into what's called self energy with a capital S. I call it the inner CEO, that can manage the inner team. And the qualities of this self energy are exactly what we experience when we're meditating, when we're taking psychedelics, when we're out in nature with loved ones, making love, having deep conversations. There are these 8 C qualities: connection, clarity, curiosity, compassion, courage. There are these different qualities of what's called self, and it's who we really are. And that part, or it's not even a part, that essence of us, when it is taking the wheel of the bus and all of these parts I'm describing are sitting in the back along for the ride, it does amazing work in the world. It intuitively knows how to relate to people, how to relate to ourselves. It can resolve conflict. It can communicate effectively. It's deeply connected with not even just personal intrinsic values, but something deeper than that, and knows what the world needs and what the contribution that we want to make is. And that is, if that's running the show, believe me, like, I let this part of me run the show more and more. It's my active sort of self-development work I'm doing all the time through my meditation, my therapy, my coaching, everything I do, psychedelics work, everything. When that is running the show, we just show up as our absolute best self. And once people start to experience that, all the fears, doubts, and objections that you mentioned a few minutes ago, they just drop away.
I'm curious with the inner values, like when we get down to our true values and we've removed the sort of masquerading values that are there as protectors. When we get down to, is it always, this might be a weird question, but is it always a set of values that's always about service to others? Because
Yes.
what I notice in this kind of work is that the goal, like, should be that everybody gets to be basically a point where they're just, working in a soup kitchen, giving away to the homeless. and I feel that that's limiting in itself, that you have to get to a place where you're basically giving yourself away. And maybe that's the wrong language, but is that the only place that everybody is meant to arrive? Because surely there's other places that people can get to, and maybe there's people's egos that are worried about this and being like, I don't necessarily feel like my core values are, working in a soup kitchen or giving and helping and figuring out. And I feel that society would judge me for not being that. And so I've been forcing myself into service for a really long time and burning myself out.
Yeah, look, it's a really great question, and another common objection, of course, that comes up.
Mm-hmm.
So let's start by thinking about Maslow's pyramid, getting our needs met: physical needs, safety needs, interpersonal needs, self-actualization needs. What Maslow started to talk about later in life is what happens when you hit the point of that pyramid and you're fully self-actualized and just doing the things that you love, that give you a sense of deep inherent meaning. without, worrying about your safety and worrying about all those other things downstream of that because you've dealt with it already. And what a lot of people don't realize about Maslow is that pyramid doesn't stop at the point, but it keeps going into service.
Yeah, it's a direct line to God after that.
It's exactly. It's a direct line, express elevator to God, to enlightenment. And so Maslow talked a lot about service and contribution in the later part, sort of latter half of his life. But that service and contribution, it doesn't mean quitting your high-powered job and going and working in a soup kitchen. It really doesn't. Some people might feel called to that, to the simplicity and the humility of just actually giving in that way. But some people might be in a multinational company, like a mining company or some huge retailer, and realize that actually if I stay in this role, this highly powerful role in this industry that contributes amazing things but also generates a lot of harm, I can actually force leverage some much greater change than if I quit and went and worked in a soup kitchen or went and meditated in a cave for the rest of my life. That's where I like to keep people. When I'm working with high-powered people doing executive coaching and they start to wake up in this way, I encourage them. I don't tell them what to do, but I encourage them to listen deeply to what they want to do. And sometimes, in fact, quite often, they choose to stay and create powerful change from the inside just by showing up in a totally different way, not worried so much about what other people think about them, not trying to get that next promotion, not worried so much about their personal brand, just being more authentic or vulnerable. It's another word that triggers people when I do this work. So vulnerable is the V word, or authentic or real or, values driven, however you want to talk about it. And they can create.
Why do people get triggered by that?
There are certain words: trauma, narcissism, vulnerability. Vulnerability for a lot of people, particularly in corporate contexts where I spend a lot of my time, it feels very unpowerful. I'm now vulnerable, like I'm a little puppy and I've turned my belly towards you and please don't hurt me. Yeah. And unless you dive deep into Brené Brown's work and understand the power of vulnerability and how vulnerability is really just to not have to be in control of everything all the time, is kind of how Brené Brown talks about it. And anybody playing a big enough game is sometimes going to find themselves out of their comfort zone. It's not if they fail, it's when. And she talks about Navy SEALs and elite sports people and business leaders and stuff who, are willing to just be vulnerable. And a vulnerable conversation is not just like, hey, I'm just going to emote all the time and tell you everything that's going on for me and overshare and stuff. No. Vulnerability sometimes is being able to call someone into your office and saying, hey, you are out of alignment with our core values and that's not really working here. What are we going to do about that? Or you seem like you're having a really hard time. Do you want to tell me a little bit about what's going on there? Sometimes vulnerability is having to move a company in a new direction and knowing that your team's going to freaking hate that, but just owning your role as the leader of this organization and saying, hey guys, this is what we have to do. This is the reasoning behind it. Let's get behind that. What are the objections and the obstacles we would need to overcome to do that? So vulnerability is actually a very powerful thing, but people often associate it with being weak and being shat upon. And of course, that's often how we have experienced being vulnerable when we're young. One of my mentors, Eric Larson's a psychology mentor and one of my besties, uses the metaphor of the peanut M&M. He says, when we're little, we're just little peanuts, just being authentic and real and in the moment and responding to what's happening. But life has a way of throwing shit at us. If we're vulnerable, people bully us for that. They judge us for that. We get in trouble for that. And so life throws shit at us, that's the unfortunate part of this metaphor, that the chocolate's actually not chocolate. And it builds up and it builds up. And then suddenly we're a little peanut covered in shit. And we're like, whoa, I can't show this to the world because if I'm going to school and being vulnerable, people are bullying me for it. So we put a nice veneer, a nice coloured, candy shell over the top. And that's how a lot of people go through life. But so we can drop the word vulnerability, right? We could just say being real, being authentic, taking off that candy-coated shell, acknowledging at least to ourselves that we have a bit of shit that we might want to deal with at some point. And we can peel back those layers and get in touch with who or what we really are. And when we realize what we really, really are, it's that self energy I was talking about. And then we can start to go through life from that place. So let's just use the word authenticity or realness if that sort of triggers people. But it's funny, the words that trigger people, because we're also invested in being tough and strong, and that's what we're sold. Who are the leadership avatars in the world? I mean, some people really like Brené Brown, Jacinda Ardern, et cetera, but a lot of people really like Dave Goggins, can't hurt me. He's the epitome of someone who is protector-led to me. It's like, respect to Dave Goggins, amazing guy, has done a lot, but is he really the leadership avatar that all young men should look up to? I'm so tough and disconnected from any part of my body and emotions and humanity that you can't hurt me, because he was bullied for being, fat shamed by his dad when he was a kid, and then just formed this like, invincible. Even being a Navy SEAL wasn't enough. I've got to be a Navy SEAL super marathon runner running 100 Ks through the Sahara Desert without water. That's how invulnerable I am. For me, that's maybe not the kind of leadership that we need more of in the world right now. I think maybe a bit more listening and connection with something a bit deeper, for me, might actually be pretty useful.
Well, you bring up a really good point, which is something I wanted to ask before, but this kind of sort of rounds it out nicely, because you talk about the peanut, we're all little peanuts and these cute little peanuts, and then we get all the shit thrown at us for being vulnerable and for expressing ourselves. And that is in essentially the thing that teaches us how to behave in that particular social setting, at least so that we don't get shit thrown at us. And so thinking of David Goggins, who I agree is, not a good, sort of, he is not the embodiment of healthy masculinity. I mean, the guy's on his third wife and clearly can't have, healthy relationships. And now, even despite all his success, his day job is getting dropped into the middle of forest fires out of helicopters for minimum wage. Because, like you said, it's another show of like nothing can get to me, and so. But having said that, a couple of questions come to mind. But is there a world where we can raise children safely and also have these hyper dangerous, let's say, men like maybe Dave Goggins? I don't want to be in his vicinity when he gets mad, because the reality is that we are in a social hierarchy, right? And we're hierarchical beings, and shit is going to get thrown everybody's way. And so the thing, and maybe this is a common objection, because it seems like I keep coming out with common objections, but the way that I see it is that I went through this phase of my own healing journey where I like really hated my mum and blamed her for being just really shit. And now I've kind of got to a point where I was like, where I think I'm really glad that I went through that, and that I've got resilience, and I've learned how to navigate myself. And without that physical and emotional resilience that had to be developed in order to survive, then I wouldn't have the capacity, I believe, to be able to step into a dangerous altercation and know that I can handle myself, right?
Yeah.
Or have the backbone or the masculinity or whatever word you want to use to protect the women in my life if I needed to,
100%.
And so I wonder about this idea of, raising kids in this untriggerable environment and this untriggerable word where
the coddling of the American mind, as Jonathan Haidt talks about. That's not. First of all, if I respond, there are some unsafe elements in the world. There are some regimes in the world and people in power with nuclear buttons and all the kind. It's a pretty dangerous world still. And I'm very sad that the militaries of the world have invited wokeness in, because I think it's very disempowering, and it's only certain militaries that would do that. Like, I don't think Russia and North Korea and China are particularly woke in their approach. So it's in one way, it's a disempowering, and I think that there is a place for strong. I mean, it is a form of conscious and healthy masculinity, aggression in a particular container, a particular environment. So that's one thing I would say. Like, there is definitely a role for the Dave Gogginses, and that's why, like, full respect, Jocko Willink, all the Navy SEALs, the SAS troopers, all the and I look forward to a world where we don't need that. For Western countries to say, let's make the military woke and let's focus more on kind of like woke politics than actually defending ourselves. That's a really dangerous game to play, in my opinion. This is going to piss people off.
Mine too.
But this is my opinion on things, right? Until the world becomes safer. Then you bring in Buddhism 101. If you see anger in the world and you respond with anger, it creates more anger, and that just amplifies and goes round and round and round, literally forever. And the only way to do that is to step out of it. But to step out of it in a skillful way where you are not allowing harm and bad behavior, but you're not immediately attacking it and trying to get rid of it. And that, of course, is a highly skillful thing that most people aren't capable of doing. If I bring it back jump in.
I was just going to say, but the only way that we would arrive at a world like that, and correct me if I'm wrong in this line of thinking, but the only way we would arrive at a world where we don't need all of that, military presence and weapons and nuclear buttons is if no child was ever traumatized.
Correct. Anywhere in the world. And that's probably never going to happen. I hope it does, but I don't think it's very realistic.
Oh, I think it's important that we hope and work towards it happening. Yeah.
Yeah. And slowly, this is I think in the kind of the woke movement, I think there's actually a lot of good. There's some compassion in there. There's some very great ideas. And I think that in a lot of ways, if you pull the politics out of it and the agendas out of it, it's actually a very beautiful thing. There's some, like I said, the compassion, all those kinds of things. But let's just do it slowly. Let me give an example in my own life. Like you, I've got a part, an exile that feels deeply unsafe in the world. I can remember actually in psychedelic journeys and in deep therapy processes, I can remember being in my mum's womb, feeling all of her stress hormones because she felt completely unsupported by my dad, unsafe in the world. She's very anxious. And I was pumped full of stress hormones in the womb. And it's not a conscious memory so much as just I remember being like, oh, this is dangerous out here. I'm going to get in trouble. Then I was born, had asthma. My health, was trying to kill me. I literally flatlined twice. I've died twice and been revived. Got bullied at school. So, dude, I got so many messages that it's unsafe. And I've been training martial arts my whole life as a result, not actually needing it. Most people who start training, the fights just kind of go away because they hold themselves differently and they're more aware of their surroundings. These days, I love to train. I've been run by this protector that's constantly thinking about altercations. I walk in a room, I'm immediately aware of who's the biggest alpha guy, how would I take him out. This is a program that has been running in me for a long time, and I've trained this. These days, I really like playing with that. I call it my dark masculine energy. I love combatives, like military combatives. Krav Maga is an example of that. I don't train Krav, I train something else. There's another lineage that I'm really into, Lee Morrison. Urban combatives. And what Lee Morrison says is that all of us have this dark energy killer, rapist, murderer, protector, and if it's in the shadows, it can show up in any of those different ways for good or bad. But if we bring it into awareness, we can acknowledge it and we can play with it. He talks about having this guy in a vault, chained to the wall, big door, and you consciously unlock the door, unchain this aspect of ourselves, bring it onto the dojo mat and play it out and experiment, volume control. What's a 1 out of 10 response for a 1 out of 10 threat? But what's a 10 out of 10 response if 2 armed, masked men came into your house right now and headed for your bedroom? What would you do in that situation? And what would a 10 out of 10 response to that look like? And you kind of train that as much as you can. And then when you feel like you're trained it, you thank that guy and you put him back in the vault and lock the door because you don't want him leaking out in the world. You don't want to be in your thoughts or behaviors, but getting to know it. This is what Jordan Peterson's message is too. For men, if they don't own that killer in them, they're not fully connected with all parts of themselves. If they sort of neglect it, reject, oh, that's bad, I don't want to be that kind of guy, or we don't need that in the world, or that's toxic masculinity, blah, blah, blah. It's putting something in the shadows that needs to be in the light. And looping back around to the parts, the manager, the protector parts, right? The manager's firefighters, also known as protector parts, they have protected us. And what you were describing before, they help us in our lives. I did get bullied, and it was good to have this kind of protector part, and I now no longer need it in the way that I did. But the only real way, the respectful way to relate to that is to see these protectors and just be grateful that they have been here. And when I'm doing this kind of inner work with people, at the moment that you can see one of your protectors and understand its role in your life so fully and see what it's trying to get for you that's been so good and is no longer needed, that you can bow to it and thank it with 100% genuine gratitude, that's the moment that these parts are generally willing to step back and let us see what they've been trying to protect us from, where we start doing the inner work with the exiles or those attachment wounds and those different wounds. And so bringing all these things into awareness, this is at the core of what I do as a mindfulness trainer, meditator. I want to bring all parts of us into awareness. And if we immediately judge that, and I mean, how much judgment is there at the moment around aspects of the male sort of masculine, let's say, psyche, like I'm talking about, this frame of everything's patriarchy, toxic masculinity, and rape culture. And of course, not realizing that all men and all women and people of any genders have kind of what we could, this triggering people, of course, is, of course, masculine and feminine parts. There are nurturing, loving, present parts that value connection and relationship and that kind of stuff. And then there are parts of us that value success, achievement, goals, extrinsic values. And if you're really honest, there are parts of all of us that could kill. And if they're in the shadows, then they operate in the shadows, or they're just like programs in a computer that they're running in the background and they shape our behaviors and our thoughts. But let's bring it all on the table and make it all okay to have all of these parts, not to be run by them, not to cause harm with them, but just to see, hey, we have all these different parts, and the really parts that are sort of trying to help us with trauma. How do we heal the trauma? And how do we acknowledge those parts in a way that they feel respected and seen and are willing to step back rather than being sidelined? And that's how I do my inner work, whether it's on the dojo mat, in, like I said, psychedelic ceremony, in my therapy or coaching work. That's how I do my inner work, or in my relationship, constantly working through this stuff. And that's what I like to do with other people too, to create a space where all parts of us feel welcome and we can start to understand why they're there, what they're trying to get, how to relate to them in a respectful way. And the parts that are running the show, maybe they could step back a little bit. We can heal the underlying wounds. And eventually it's us, it's our true self that's driving the bus, making great decisions, connecting very intuitively and easily with people around us, in touch with deep values, and making some kind of valuable contribution that may or may not be in a soup kitchen, could be in a boardroom, could be on the battlefield. Who knows, right?
Yeah, I love parts work. I use it with clients as well. And yeah, use it in my own head in similar ways to the way that you just talked, relationships, life, self. And I think as well, one of the things that I found along the journey is that because we have so much judgment of the dark parts of ourselves, and we going back to that use of the word vulnerable being triggering, is that many people judge other people that have brought those parts forward because they can't imagine themselves looking at all of themselves and looking and owning the dark parts of themselves that are in the shadows. And so they judged vulnerable people and as weak, because the truth is that they actually aren't strong enough themselves to bring the dark truth about who they are into the light to say, shit, I did this, or I was this person once, right?
And you still are. This is the thing. Anyone who triggers you, if their vulnerability triggers you, it's because you don't want to acknowledge your own vulnerability. If their rage triggers you, it's because you've suppressed your own rage. If their desire for success triggers you, if someone's having a great relationship and that's triggering you, it's because you want that great relationship. So it's actually, people are a mirror. If any time you feel triggered by anyone, that's an invitation. We blame and judge and blah, 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 and you're bad and wrong. But if you just turn the finger and look within, you'll always see that there's something in you that's getting stirred up. And it's a what's called a trailhead. It's the beginning of a pathway that you can follow into who you really are and what's unresolved and what needs to come into the light a little bit more.
Man, this is such a good conversation, but I know we need to wrap up.
Yeah.
I really feel like we could have sank in for like 2 solid hours, but I know you've got a role and so do I. So before we finish up, so that everybody can get into your world and get more of you, where can they find you on the interwebs?
Best places would be my website, drrichardchambers.com, drrichardchambers.com. There I talk about all the work that I do in my coaching, my trainings and workshops, my organizational consulting. I've got free resources, meditations, books, academic articles, a whole bunch of stuff people might find interesting. And if anyone wants to know anything more about what I've been talking about or want some support with any of this stuff, there's a contact form. They could reach out to me there. So that'd be a really good place to start.
Incredible. I'll put all of the links down in the show notes below. And if you happen to be on YouTube anytime soon, just type Dr. Richard Chambers' name in because you'll see some awesome stuff there as well. And before we finish, and I know that there's so many answers to this question, but what is one piece of health information you wish more people knew about?
Well, let's theme it with the show, right? That we have different parts that want different things. And so, if any of your listeners are really hearing these messages that you put out there and they're like, oh, that's resonating so much on some level, and they're not acting fully in alignment with all of the advice and the tools that you're giving them, that's not because there's anything wrong with them. They're not lazy. They're not flawed. It's just because there's some other part of them that's running things in those moments and it values something else. So to make maximum use of this show and all the beautiful information that you transmit to the world, just knowing that there's a part that really hears this and wants this for ourselves and others, and there's perhaps parts that don't. And that's why we set New Year's resolutions to get fit and healthy or eat less sugar, but then a week later, not in the gym, on the couch, Netflix and chocolate. It's because there's different parts of us. And again, just be aware of that, and it's okay, but just notice when you run by either part and just choose, do I want to keep being run by this part, or do I want to actually drop into my core value set? And sometimes even just seeing that is all you need to do. I don't want to keep being run by my sugar addicted parts. I'm going to do something about it. But sometimes that sugar addicted part is a firefighter trying to hose down some emotional pain that's underneath or a feeling of emptiness. And maybe there's some inner work that needs to be done there, which will then allow you to not be run by that protector and to be more aligned with who you really are, who's just inherently, intuitively going to eat healthily, exercise in a sustainable, intelligent way, spend time in nature, spend time with loved ones, and do all the things that create actual health.
Fantastic. What a great answer. I love it. I love it. Thanks for coming on the show, man. I really appreciate your time. And obviously we'll get you back. Yeah, we need to do this more regularly. And that's probably a me problem. I need to clear my calendar more often.
I'll clear my calendar anytime you want me to come back on.
Thanks, brother. We'll catch up with you soon.
Okay. Nice chatting, Matty.
See you, man.
See ya.